Hi, I'm Emma Douthwaite, Safeguarding and Welfare Manager at the Office for Students. From the 1st of August, our new condition of registration means that registered universities and colleges in England must take certain actions to protect students from harassment and sexual misconduct. In this video, I'll look at how universities and colleges will need to protect students from abuses of power and conflicts of interest in intimate personal relationships with members of staff. First, we'll look at meeting the requirements. The intention of these requirements is to ensure students are protected from actual or potential abuses of power and conflicts of interest that can arise in intimate personal relationships with staff members. By intimate personal relationships, we are talking about relationships between students and staff that involve physical intimacy and/or romantic or emotional intimacy. Abuse of power means a situation where a staff member exploits their position of power over a student. This can lead to the student doing or not doing something that they would not have otherwise done. And it might include situations where a student is pressured to enter or remain in a relationship with a staff member. This sort of abuse or conflict of interest can mean that a staff member gives the student either detrimental or favourable treatment. For example, they might assess their academic performance favourably or unfavourably, give them a positive or negative reference, or grant or withhold access to resources or extra support. We are not prescribing a specific approach to managing intimate personal relationships between staff and students, but you must set out one or more steps that could individually or in combination make a significant and credible difference in protecting students from any actual or potential conflicts of interest and/or abuses of power. Include your approach to protecting students from any actual or potential conflicts of interest and/or abuses of power in your single comprehensive source of information. As set out in the condition, your single comprehensive source of information must be published in a prominent position and be easily accessible to current and prospective students. In identifying the steps you want to take to comply with our requirements, universities and colleges should consider the different forms of abuse of power that can take place within intimate personal relationships between staff and students. You should consider how the steps you introduce will be effective in addressing these. In our guidance, we have included suggested policy options you may want to consider. A ban on intimate personal relationships, which prohibits relationships between relevant staff and students, is one way you can demonstrate compliance with our requirements, but it's not the only option. You may consider that a ban on some or all relationships is not the most appropriate option to manage and address abuses of power and conflicts of interest. If you choose not to introduce a ban, the alternative measures will need to make a significant and credible difference in protecting students from abuses of power and conflicts of interest. These may include a ban with exemptions, explicitly discouraging relationships, raising students' awareness of behaviours that may amount to an abuse of power, ensuring staff are trained about appropriate professional relationships, and empowering students to refuse and report inappropriate behaviour. A policy which consists of only a statement which discourages relationships between staff and students will not be considered compliant. Whether you opt for a ban or another policy option, if you choose a policy which permits some or all relationships between staff and students, you must still manage any actual or potential conflict of interest or abuse of power so that students are protected. Some examples of how you might manage conflicts of interest or abuse of power include requiring staff to disclose intimate personal relationships with students, managing the academic or professional interaction between a relevant staff member and a student to ensure the student's academic, employment, or pastoral interests are not compromised. This will also mean that providers manage the academic and professional interaction so students understand the process and that there is confidence that these are being approached and applied fairly for all students. When taking steps to manage actual or potential conflicts of interest and/or abuses of power, a provider should take steps to ensure that a student involved is not disadvantaged. We have received questions about how universities and colleges can manage actual or potential abuses of power and conflicts of interest where the staff member is not employed by the university or college. For example, where you have students on work or study placements. You are required to take significant and credible steps to protect students from actual or potential conflicts of interest or abuses of power. This isn't restricted to what occurs on your own campus, so it should consider how risks might arise from work and study placements. For example, seeking assurance that partners delivering these have appropriate arrangements and policies in place to identify and respond to risks. If you're made aware of issues of abuse of power for students on placement, you should consider taking prompt and effective action to ensure that students are adequately protected and receive appropriate support. This could include engaging with the organisation to ensure action was being taken to investigate alleged incidents or prevent future ones, or ending the placement relationship where appropriate assurances are not given. In implementing a ban, you may choose to focus on relevant staff members, apply exclusions for existing relationships. However, you may choose to introduce a ban that goes further than set out in our definitions. For example, by applying a ban to a wider group of staff than our definition of relevant staff, or by banning relationships even where these are pre-existing. As long as a ban meets the requirements we have set out in the condition, the OFS would deem a more extensive ban compliant with our registration condition. We use the definition of relevant staff member in our definition of a ban on intimate personal relationships. This is intended to capture relationships where abuses of power and conflicts of interest towards students may occur. A relevant staff member is a member of staff who has direct academic responsibilities or other direct professional responsibilities in relation to that student. When thinking about which staff are relevant, you will want to start with the definition of staff, which includes but is not limited to employees and contractors of the provider. The reference to academic responsibilities includes teaching, supervision, and assessment, among others. The reference to other direct professional responsibilities captures staff with a direct professional or pastoral responsibility for a student. This may include mental health advisors, staff operating student complaint processes, and security personnel. This definition could apply to short-term teaching arrangements, students who are also staff, including PhD and research students, and other staff who may not hold teaching roles. Cleaning or catering staff would not normally be captured by the definition of a relevant staff member unless they have a direct professional responsibility for a student. You should focus on addressing the risk of abuse of power and understanding the risks in your own context to determine which staff to include in your approach to protecting students from abuses of power. There are some relationships which you may choose to exclude from the scope of the ban. Excluded relationships can fall into the following categories: relationships that existed before the condition comes into effect and are ongoing, and relationships which existed before the staff member became a relevant staff member in relation to that student. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. We hope you have found it useful to understand our requirements for protecting students from abuses of power and conflicts of interest in intimate personal relationships with staff members. We have more information on our website, including the full condition and detailed guidance, guides and webinars for students and higher education providers, as well as our guidance related to freedom of speech.